Maybe you can hear that from the way I talk about it. But it just feels so magical when you see it. I just did this like an hour ago, and I needed to test something out, something completely unrelated, and it replied to me, here's the stories that I wrote for you. They just worked. And like there were play functions and all that jazz. Because it's now pulling in this information from the MCP server.
Hello, welcome to devtools-fm. This is a podcast about developer tools and the people who make them. I'm Andrew, and this is my co-host, Justin.
Hey, everyone. We're really excited to have Jeppe Reinhold on with us of the Chromatic team. We haven't had a conversation about Storybook since 2021, like episode number 5. It was a long time ago. So we're really excited to revisit this topic and just figure out where the Chromatic team is and what's new in the Storybook world. But before we dive into that, Jeppe, you want to give our audience a little bit of an intro?
Yeah, so I'm Jeppe. I have been in the Storybook team for 3 years now, working at Chromatic. So Chromatic is a company that funds and powers the Storybook team. So I'm a core contributor to Storybook. I work in open source every single day. It's a lot of fun. I'm from Denmark, and I joined just when Storybook 7 was in the works. And if anyone that knows Storybook, they know that the shift between Storybook 6 and 7 was sort of 2 different planets. So that was a lot of fun. So that's me in a nutshell.
Sweet. So yeah, a lot has changed in the world of Storybook since we last talked to a member of the Storybook team. 2021 was a very long time ago, and there's been 6 major versions since then. And a lot of things have changed in those. So like back then, like builds were kind of like a hard thing. They were very fast with Storybook. Kind of the whole ecosystem was slow, but Storybook's done a lot of work to make that experience far, far better. Like I start up Storybook every day and I'm amazed at how fast it starts up now. Like it's almost instant. So can you tell us a little bit about that journey of how you as a team took Storybook from what it was to what it is now?
So I think the speed boost definitely started with the shift from Webpack to Vite. The Vite integration was originally a community integration maintained by some awesome folks. And then we saw how important that was. We saw how fast that was. So we brought it into Storybook Core and made it a core experience. So you can use Storybook either with Webpack or Vite today, but we are trying to push everyone towards the Vite experience. Even if you today have your app built with Webpack, we still suggest that your Storybook is built with Vite because it's just so much faster. And there's even more features now. It's not just about performance anymore. It's also about features that we'll come into later. So that was, of course, the big shift. And then we just had I think there was just a lot of feedback from Storybook users on Reddit and Twitter and whatever about Storybook being too slow because the applications were starting to get fast, but Storybook wasn't keeping up. So that was like super annoying to, I should say, start up Storybook. So there was just like a huge focus from the core team, like, okay, we need to fix this. This is bad. And it started with cutting, like making things more lazily loaded so that we can start up and then immediately show you something and then starting to render. And then that turned into also slimming Storybook down, making it smaller because that's smaller is faster, and just keep doing that over and over again over multiple releases to where we are today, which is different. And so I think the shift was also major in that the Storybook core team grew a lot. So back in 2022, it grew from being 3 engineers to now we are 8 with the managers. And so we just had a lot more manpower to focus on these nitty-gritty details that the users loved instead of just pushing out feature after feature. So yeah, that was like the high-level answer to the performance boost. So one of the things that we've done for the past few years has been the size. We started with Storybook 8, I believe, where we were like, okay, Storybook is this massive beast built in this old way of thinking. I mean, it wasn't old at the time, but if you've been around JavaScript for a few years, you know how Babel works and how Webpack works. It's a lot of a lot of packages talking to each other, and Storybook was built the same way because that was how you built big systems back then. But then new packages showed up, like Vite and others, like that showed that you can do this with just one package. And you don't have to have a gazillion imports all over the place. And so we started to really take that in and slim the Storybook core down to be just like, okay, what if Storybook is just the bare minimum packages that you use? Oh, that cuts the size in half. What if we really look at our dependency tree and the dependency sizes, and then we can see, oh, we can actually remove 90% of the dependencies that we have. And doing that over and over again, keep hacking at the next low hanging fruit, uh, is where we're at today with Storybook 10 and the ESM only migration we've just done.
So one of the things that's really striking to me is like how much the authoring experience for writing a story is. So for anyone listening who hasn't like actually used Storybook, which I think maybe is a good frame of reference here, it's this project where you sort of define a story for your UI component, React components, Svelte component, whatever it may be. And you can, add a lot of plugins and, have like controls, for example, to control like different prop values or like display a component in different states or give docs or whatever. And so for the last several major releases, there's been this component story format. When was that introduced?
Over 3 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah. So that's been a big thing for a while. So let's just talk kind of about like how that's evolved, because I'm sure that's like a part of the performance story as well, right? It's like
sure.
How you actually author a story like matters a lot in terms of like data loading and everything else.
Oh yeah, for sure. So the biggest shift was definitely the change from Storybook 6 to Storybook 7 in terms of the component story format. And the initial format was like these imperative function calls. You'd call like stories off, and then you'll write whatever code you wanted to register new stories. And that was a great flexible authoring experience, but it was impossible for us to optimize. We couldn't look at that on the server side and just be like, oh wow, we know exactly what stories you have, so we can immediately spin up those. You would have to actually execute your code, and that was extremely slow when you had a lot, like when you have thousands of stories. And so that's why the component story format 1, 2, and later version 2 and 3 came into play. Was essentially, how can we define a JavaScript, well, a set of JavaScript constructs that we are able to, in a performant way, analyze upfront using static analysis, to make it so that we know exactly what stories you have, without even having to execute your code. And so that's where the we call it CSF comes in. And the latest CSF3 that everyone is using now is really just like, well, you have to export your stories as an export const something. And because in JavaScript, that way of writing is very restricted, you can't dynamically export anything from a module. You have to statically export something. That really helps us out, because that means that you're limited in the way that you write your stories, so that we can analyze them and show them immediately. Of course, like these changes in format, especially for teams that had 1,000, 2,000 stories, was a big shift. They had to migrate a lot, but that just really pushed us to write these auto migrations, which is like one code mod to run, and then you really started to use these new formats. Should I introduce a bit more about what Storybook is, or are we just assuming that people know what it is and what stories are?
Whatever context you think is good. We like to explain everything from like the base.
I see. I think it's important to know that Storybook is like this companion app that you build alongside your front end. So you have your application Next.js or whatever, and then you have Storybook on the side. And Storybook is a way for you to develop your components in isolation. So you write these stories, which are these files that we just talked about, which references your components, and so that you can see how does this card component work without being in the application itself, but just being isolated, so that you can work on the prop specifically, or you can work on testing the component without it being in the application. So it's very much like a unit view of your components. And then a component is whatever you define a component to be. So it can also be like multiple. It could be a leaf button, or it can be a full form, or even a page. And a Next.js page is also a component behind the scenes. Uh, so Storybook is that workbench, and then you can use Storybook to document your components, and you can also use Storybook to test your components, which is something we've improved a lot over the past few years with the new Storybook testing, component testing we call it, with Vitest. Um, and what I think sets Storybook apart from a lot of the other tools is that Storybook is very visual because your UI is visual. So you want to use Storybook in the browser where you can see the component. You don't want to just be in the terminal seeing logs about what happened. You want to actually see and interact with the UI. So that's Storybook in a nutshell, I guess.
Yeah. Going back to not that, in my current workplace, we have a mix of like things are in stories and things are not in stories. When things are not in stories, it is like it's pulling teeth to like even try to understand how do I get this thing to display in the UI. That alone is like sometimes jumping through hoops.
I think the classic example is when you have this form that opens in a modal and you're doing development on it. But like to get to that state in the application, you have to click 4 buttons, and whenever you reload, you have to click these 4 buttons again to open the modal, and that's just super annoying whenever you want to iterate on your UI, right? And so if you put it into Storybook, you control the state, you control what it does, so you can immediately see the changes. I think that's the flagship use case for that.
So that ESM journey and like the changing of the API really enabled a lot of stuff. Like, I don't think you could do the same type of testing if you were going in that like the imperative, like side effectful way that you used to do stories. So, what are the different types of testing that got enabled by moving to CSF?
So again, this ability to being able to seeing the stories up front has been a big boost for us. If you look at Playwright, or if you look at again even Vitest UI mode, which like they're great teams, but the way you write test is imperative. So when you open up Playwright, it doesn't know what stories you have. It has to like load all your code, or it doesn't know what tests you have. And then it loads your code, and then it sees, oh, these are the tests that you have written, and so then you can see it in UI, right? Whereas for Storybook, we immediately populate the sidebar with all your stories, and because we do that analysis up front, and that same holds true for testing. So because the tests are visible in the sidebar immediately, you are able to just like click that you can click the context menu of a story and say, I want to run tests for this specifically. And you do that. Or you can do it like for a whole component or everything. And I think that's that's just like the powerfulness of the format. We work on a new CSF factory functions, we call them, which is slightly more imperative, but not in a way that it breaks down anything that's just said, but it just improves type safety for your stories so that it becomes more like this factory pattern or the builder pattern, where you define your meta as a function call, and then from that you define your stories as function calls, so that you have the typing system, the TypeScript system knows exactly which properties are available in the story, and then can give you more hints, even from add-ons and such. So it's sort of like we're getting into this hybrid mode that still gives us the performance abilities without giving you the constraints of the language itself.
So one of the things that Storybook does is it's not just for one framework. It's for like basically all the frameworks under the sun. So like that must present a whole host of challenges when it comes to like trying to create that format so that it serves all different use cases.
Very much. So we try to make the format itself support all the frameworks, because we want Storybook to be framework as an agnostic. It's not always doable. With React, you have JSX. So in React, you can write your components directly in your JavaScript. But for Vue, you probably want to use like Vue components in a Vue file where you can't just define JavaScript next to it. The same for Svelte. And so there's these other frameworks where you actually want to use the Vue or the Svelte language, but that doesn't really play well with the component story format. And in those cases, for Svelte, we're maintaining an add-on called Svelte CSF, which is essentially what would it look like if you were able to write stories in Svelte. So instead of writing JavaScript, you write a Svelte component, and then you define your markup as these svelte story components, and then whatever you put inside them will be rendered. Um, and we got there because essentially some of the svelte constructs, like snippets or back when slots was a thing, they were like almost impossible to support in pure JavaScript. You had to be in a svelte component, and so the authoring experience is just way better when you're in that framework native language. Of course, that presents problems because it means like when we're developing these new factory functions for CSF, we have to do them first for JavaScript and then also for Svelte and then also even for Vue. Like there's a community add-on for Vue as well, and that's more work than just doing it once. But we also know how big of a difference it makes. Like I write a lot of Svelte code, and I would not write pure JavaScript stories in Svelte because that's just a bad experience. So sometimes you just need to adapt to the language, and that's just how it is.
I think this is an interesting point, and I'm gonna like pull it back to like this historical context. I think when like we were sort of talking earlier about like how, you know, annoying it is to like see a component in a particular state, and like back in the, say, when Webpack was sort of the height of the tools that we're using, and you know, there weren't many meta frameworks. You know, a lot of times when you were like building like a full stack React app, you were kind of cobbling sort of things together. It wasn't easy without like someone who's like an expert in front end infrastructure to say, oh, I'm just going to add like a new sub app here, or like a new route that's like isolated or whatever. It wasn't like, yeah, just create a new file. No, it was like really hard. And you know, at the time, Storybook like came in as like, we'll be this sidecar, you do this format, write your component how you always write your component, we'll render it in this like nice little UI. And yeah, there was like an integration cost, but it was like a one time. You like did it and then, you know, whatever. The world has changed a lot. Now a lot of the front end world is sort of ruled by meta frameworks. So the Next.js, the Nux, the Svelte kit, you know, Astro, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Spinning up sub apps or like sub routes or whatever is like a lot cheaper. Like, so displaying components in a lot of ways is a lot cheaper. So I'm curious, like, how the change of the sort of like state of the industry and how the change of the state of like how we build UI has like impacted like Svelte or the Storybook's sort of adoption. Because like, as you were saying, to get people from different communities who like build components in different ways into using Storybook, you have to sort of like meet them where they're at in all these different use cases. And that seems like a really hard problem on the sort of like headwinds of people just being able to throw together new UI really easily.
I think I definitely see what you mean. I think we've all been in that place where we added that /test route, and we just dumped in components and just used that as a way to like look at my components, right? Until we got to the place where a lot of our users are at, where like, okay, this is not sustainable anymore. I need to have a more a structured way to have a catalog of my components, essentially. And then that's where they reach for Storybook. So the value of Storybook is not necessarily that it's just set up and works. Because as you say, that is also true for meta frameworks today. The value is more about having this opinionated way for you to see and document your components, especially in the era of LLMs, where that's even more important. But it has also forced us to integrate more deeply with these meta frameworks. Like we have Storybook / Next.js as a package. When we detect that you are starting up Storybook in a Next.js thing, we immediately just integrate with that. We pull in all the configs that you had in your Next.js. We pull that into Storybook as well, so you don't have to redo all that. We do it for Vite as well. We do it for SvelteKit, React Native, all that, right? And that's necessary now because you as a user expect that when you start up, when you use a CLI to create a project, it just works from day one. And so we've had to adapt and also do that. So you don't have to configure Vite and Webpack all the time. There is still an upfront cost. And I think that's our biggest issue today we have with Storybook, is that getting to those first 5 or 10 stories takes some time, because like maybe you have in React, you have like a global auth provider that all your components need. And of course, that's already set up in your Next.js app, but it's not set up in Storybook. And so you need to set that up. And then you also need to set up your theme provider. And like there is some upfront cost. And we're hoping to improve that sooner or later. But once you get over that initial bump, then just spitting out story after story is becoming way easier. And I think that's the selling point. It also, because so many people use Storybook like across teams and companies, like when you switch from company A to company B, you know Storybook, and so you take Storybook with you, and so you can use Storybook to collaborate with your designers as well, and because they also know Storybook. And I think that's also one of the upsides of using Storybook instead of like building your own bespoke component catalog. But of course, there's also always trade-offs.
So I'd love to dig into like the optimization of Storybook a little more. There's like two really big pieces in there. There's the ESM story, and there's also the E18E story. How you guys eliminated all those dependencies. Maybe let's start there. You guys boast some like crazy numbers. Like you posted the graphs everywhere. Like it went from like a spider's web of half the NPM ecosystem down to like nothing. So like, what were the things that you eliminated? Like where was the web of dependencies coming from?
We early on started a collaboration with the E18E community to like figure out where do we begin, right? And then we had this huge project, multiple projects actually, to figure out what are our issues. And it was, luckily for us, it was a couple of main dependencies that like contributed to that huge spiderweb graph. It was Express, was like over half of that graph, but that also was a very integral part to our work and our code and architecture. It wasn't just like, oh, now we just need to pull out Express. There was actually a lot of work to find a replacement for that. And then there was a lot of, I guess, legacy compatibility. We would, in the old days, we would like add a bunch of dependencies to make sure that your browser bundle worked fine, both in Node and in the browser and such, which doesn't make sense to do anymore in 2025. So we removed those things, which was, of course, breaking changes, but nobody really cared because they had already moved on. It was, I can't even remember what the other big ones were, but like there was like 2 or 3 big dependencies that once we removed those, the spider web of dependencies really shrunk, and it was just like hacking away at each. So that was about the dependencies size decrease. But then there was also in general about our package distribution size, so the bundled code that we bundle in, and of course our dependencies. And so we consolidate a lot of our packages into one, which meant that we had less duplicated code. We removed CJS just recently from Storybook 10, which actually brought down the size considerably because we had already optimized Storybook for CJS and ESM and let dual distribution. But even still, removing CJS from that part was a big chunk of stuff removed. And we actually took that as an opportunity to say, okay, Storybook's actually so small now that we don't have to minify it anymore. And maybe that's like a very nitty-gritty detail of only the most hardcore power users. But Storybook's code being minified was always a chore to debug, not just for me as a core maintainer, but for also you as a user getting an error in Storybook. And then it's like, okay, what's going on? I have no idea because I can't read this code. So we unminified our code, which of course added kilobytes or megabytes back, but Storybook was still smaller even though we did that. And I can't right now remember what are the other big contributors to the size. I know that there was something with Prettier we optimized. We also had Babel 5 times, which we were able to say, okay, maybe just have that half of one. And so it was really a lot of technical depth getting cleaned up as well, and just focusing on it.
Yeah, and the blog post where y'all talked about this was like the Storybook 9 release, I think. You talked about like pre-bundling, just like pre-optimizing a lot of the dependencies.
Yeah, so we had actually done pre-bundling for many years, but now we were being more explicit about looking at each dependency and saying, okay, is this pre-bundleable? And it's a in this certain circles, the hot topic, should you pre-bundle your package code or not? We decided to do that because we saw that a lot of the dependency we had, our users would not have because they were like very library specific. So that deduplication that you lose when you pre-bundle as a package like Storybook, we wouldn't have that deduplication anyway because they don't have the same packages. But you could look at let's say Lodash, and that would be like 4 megabytes of download. But when we pre-bundle in the 4 function that we were using, that became 10 kilobytes. And just doing that pre-bundling all over again for every single package that was possible, also like shrunk down the size noticeably. There are some packages that you can't pre-bundle. You cannot pre-bundle ES build because it's a native dependency, and that's like totally fine. But so it's not just like we had to be really testing everything out whenever we change one dependency from being a regular dependency to a dev dependency.
Yeah. Not to mention going from CJS to ESM, that must have been a journey also. Like what are we, like 10, 15 years into the CJS to ESM migration? It's still not simple. So were there any hurdles there?
Oh, there was plenty. It was like a more than a year effort of like trying out, just like spiking. Can we do it like this? Okay, yes. Then we wrote a long document of learning, and then 6 months later, maybe we could do it like this, and then the learning's more, and then finally we feel like, okay, now we actually know what we can do here, and so it was like an 8-week project of 2 full-time engineers, just getting rid of CJS, and it was a lot of like importing. This module over here now has to get a path because on Windows, you can't do absolute path anymore. Like all of these very, very tiny annoyances that we will just run into day in and day out. I don't envy anyone doing that work, but we got there in the end, and that was pretty amazing. We are lucky in that Storybook is the runtime. Like you start Storybook, the CLI. Storybook is not something that you put into someone else. So we control if you start up as CJS or if you start as ESM, and so we can really take it from there and just go down, and like when you will load your code, we load it as CSM, and then we keep loading everything as CSM, and then finally the whole tree of modules, we don't have any CJS in there anymore. But there was a lot of like I have too much knowledge about CJS. No one should have that amount of knowledge because like it's just so annoying. Yeah.
I'm glad you were pushing on it though, because it's like it feels like more of the ecosystem needs to get a little bit aggressive about it. Because we're in it's like definitely kind of like the Python 2 to 3 sort of like era, but like at this point, haven't we been going longer than the? It's like it's still, it's still hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel there.
I'm very grateful for the Node team adding support for require ESM to Node 20. That they did a huge amount of work, not just adding support in Node 24, but then backporting it to 22 and then backporting again to 20. And I like that backporting work that they did to something so fundamental as module loading. I can't imagine how hard that must have been. But the fact that they did it means that now any package can migrate to ESM only without breaking anything, because Node supports both ways. And I think that's a huge opportunity for everyone to just go ESM, please, now.
Yeah, it's never been easier since the introduction of those flags.
Yeah.
So Storybook has been, since its inception, this like sort of playground for your components. And then Chromatic, the sort of company funding the development, is a company that like helps enable visual snapshot testing, which I want to talk about that soon. But that was like a very early part, and like a very obvious part is like you have these stories, you have your components in all these different states. You can like, test like screenshots of them basically between versions, and there's a lot you can learn from that. But more recently, you've done the vitest integration, so you have this like first class. We're like testing sort of behavior and interactions inside your stories, and I'd love to just hear more about like how that came along, like what made it feel like, oh, well, Storybook's like the obvious place for like these tests to live. Yeah, just tell us a little bit more about that story.
So I think we all had a feeling for a very long time that Storybook was great for testing your components. We all used it in Chromatic, which is like the place where you test your components, but that was always in CI, or it was in the cloud, right? You also wanted to test your components locally. We've had the test runner for many years, but it started to get chunky and clunky. The test runner is this separate CLI that we are building that you can use to like run on your stories, and then that will test your stuff. But it's kind of slow. And so what we also saw was that no matter what we said, no matter what we did, people would always say, "Oh, Storybook, that's the thing for design systems." And we knew that wasn't true. Like we knew that Storybook also works for your application components on your full application, because we saw one of our many of our biggest users and teams, they were using Storybook successfully to build out their whole sites. It's not just for design systems. I mean, like, why won't people understand this? Well, what is it that they want in application development that they don't necessarily need in design systems? It's not documentation, because you don't necessarily need to document your login page, right? But you want to test it. And so we were like, oh, we need to improve the testing experience of Storybook. And we saw that all the testing tools out there, they were very, as I said, in the terminal. So whenever you have your UI and the test is failing, what you get is an HTML tree, and it just says, this doesn't exist. And you're like, well, what do I do? I have no idea what do I do. But in Storybook, you can actually just interact with it. You can see, oh, well, of course the button doesn't exist because you submitted the wrong data or whatever, and so you edit it. So Storybook as a debugging platform is just great, we think. And so we added the whole component testing setup, which is essentially an integration into Vitest. We're collaborating with the Vitest team, and they're awesome guys, where you now have like this small play button or run button in the bottom of Storybook UI. When you press it, it tests all your stories. It navigates through all the stories, like behind the scenes, and runs the interaction test or the play functions, and then shows you in the sidebar you had 5 failures. And you couldn't do that before. Before, you had to manually go into a story, see that it was failing. Next story, see it was failing. But now you can do this in a matter of seconds, and you can even enable watch mode, so it's instant, right? And when we tried that on our own work, we saw like, okay, that's actually pretty magic, and it's actually also pretty fast. And it works in a real browser. It's not JS DOM or something simulated, so that also makes it more true. And then we added accessibility testing into it. So there's a checkbox. If you enable accessibility, you're not just getting failing tests, you're also getting accessibility violations reported in all your stories. And that's also a huge boom for our users. Usually when they do this and they have 500 stories, they'll have 5,000 accessibility violations. That's the unfortunate state of our industry today. But at least it's a number that they can hack on and get smaller and smaller and smaller. And we see them doing that. And so with that integration, we also added the visual testing integration so that you run Chromatic in that same experience, but it just ships your stories to the cloud, takes the snapshots, and then get it back. So you get like this snapshot of your stories in the same environment as ever. And then coming back to what I started saying was like, it's actually a very viable tool for your application developers to start putting your components into Storybook instead of just having your application only, because you're with your application you're constrained to using Playwright as like the end-to-end testing, but that's like slow and getting also, you probably only test the happy states. But when you have it like on a component level, it's way easier to write up all your failure states and get better test coverage essentially from that. And that's shipped with Storybook 9 for any Vite-based frameworks. And that also pushed us to say, okay, a huge part of our user base is Next.js, but Next.js is not built on Vite. What do? We build a Vite mock of Next.js so that our users can migrate to that Next.js Vite framework. And they're pretty happy about that because it's also way faster. So win-win, I guess.
So one hard edge to Storybook testing that I've met is there is only one play function right now. If I want to write a test and it's different from the play function, I have no options really other than to create another story, copy the entire thing, or do a whole bunch of structure stuff to get me to a place where I'm like just testing this one thing and then multiple ways. Are you guys planning on adding anything to help with that?
Yes. and we call it .test. So essentially, the factory CSF functions that I talked about later, where you had like the meta call, and then you can call the story and add in properties. What we're adding is that on a story, you can call .test, and then in there you can say, I want to run these interactions. So you define a story that is, this is the modal with the form, but maybe you have 5 tests for that modal form. So you like write the call test function 5 times with different interactions. We're still not 100% satisfied with how that API is shaped, but it is out there. If you're using React, you can use it today. It's experimental, and we are not gonna take it away from you. We're just still trying to figure out what's the best ergonomics for you, essentially, which is why it's experimental, not necessarily because it's unstable or anything. And so what that gives you also in the sidebar where you have all the stories is that now the story is not the lowest level of component. Now each story has a test also, if you want multiple tests for a single story. Because as you said, it's annoying that you have to write 5 or 10 stories, just which essentially shows the same thing, but they assert differently, and that's just annoying, right? Why isn't that just a test? And it is coming very soon.
Yeah, I'm looking at one of the discussions on the test method for CSF factories, and the factory function market improvement. I've said for a long time that the best TypeScript is no TypeScript. You shouldn't see it, and this really gets you over that line, like not having to satisfies meta or do any weird TypeScript gymnastics to get it all to work. That's a huge win.
Yeah, just the fact that you can just like you import something from your global preview, and then you just get the types from that, because that's how TypeScript works. I think that's going to be great when that gains more adoption. We're working right now on expanding the adoption to other frameworks than React. So that should hopefully be stable soon.
That's definitely exciting. I want to shift the conversation again. So we've talked about how Storybook has like lived through the era of sort of JavaScript maturity, of the maturity of how we build web products. But we're in a new era now. How we write code is changing, and how we think about code is changing with the sort of like advent of AI and LLMs, and this sort of new strange reality we find ourselves in. So Storybook is obviously, your team has proven yourself to be very adaptable. And how are you thinking about integrating into this new world with its new tools and its new paradigms? It's like, what are the opportunities that you see?
We've been thinking a lot about it. I think we're slow out of the gate when talking about integrating Storybook to LLMs. Last year, everyone was out of the gate, and we were still thinking, like, what does this mean for Storybook? And we didn't really know. And then we kept getting more and more demand for it. Like big customers of Chromatic would ask us repeatedly, when are you doing integrations? And we'd also have a bunch of users. And then in the end, we saw that the users were just building the integrations themselves because they were tired of waiting on us. And then during the summer this year, we're like, okay, we have to do something. Because now they actually want it, right? It's not just a hype cycle anymore. Or maybe it is, but it doesn't look like it is right now. And so what we've been thinking is that we really want to integrate with where the users are. And so our users are engineers and developers. They are using coding agents today. We're not going to be building our own Storybook coding agent, because you won't be using it. You will be using Claude Code or Copilot or whatever. And so we want to integrate with that. And the way you do that today, which is something that I think is pretty cool, is you do MCP servers. So we're building an MCP server for Storybook as well. And from initial reactions, it's pretty powerful. Essentially, the biggest problem that people are having today when they're building UI with their LLM or agents is that their agents are ignoring their existing components. When you ask the agent, can you please build me this e-commerce page? Then it will do that using base Tailwind classes and Next.js. It will completely ignore your components a lot of the time, especially if those components live in a design system package that is not in your repository, but just like a dependency. It will often not know to use the components directly. And so that's what we keep hearing is, why can't it know to use the thing that we've already built? We spent years on designing it in Figma and having our design system teams, why can't it just reuse that, please, instead of going off the rails? And so that's the first thing we're solving. Whereas if you're building your design system or anything in Storybook, and you've done that for years, what you've done essentially is you've poured in a ton of information into your Storybook. You have all your components in there. You have all your stories, which are essentially examples of every component. This button renders these 5 different ways. Maybe you're writing docs in MDX to document for other humans. This is how to use my components. And so you put all this information in Storybook, but you've never been able to get it out again. And like even if you disregard the whole MCP stuff, that request from users has always been there. Like, I want to get the information out of Storybook because I want to show it somewhere else in a docs website or whatever. So that's our first step is we're enabling you to get that information out. We're doing what we call component manifests. So now when you build Storybook 10.1, which was just released a week ago or two, what you also get if you enable this feature is that you get this JSON file out that is essentially all of your components with usage examples from the stories, not just CSF in the JSON, but actual, like we're converting the CSF to be a React component with JSX and like as a component. And all of the descriptions. So if you have JS doc descriptions on your components, we get that out. We get prop types out because Storybook automatically infers prop types today from your components just by looking at your TypeScript. And that data is also available in this component manifest that you get out. So that was sort of like step one. And then step two was, okay, let's build an MCP server that consumes this and shows it to the LLM. And so what it does is that it exposes a few tools and some instructions for the agent. So when you're using your Copilot agent and you're saying, I want to build a card component, what it will also do is that first it will call the Storybook MCP and say, what are the components available? List all components. And just get a list of all the components with a summary. And then it will say, oh, I need documentation on those 4 components because they seem relevant to the task at hand. And then it will ask the Storybook MCP for that. So it will get usage examples and it will get prop types documentation. It will get the written documentation for your components. And then it will use that information to build out the UI instead. And then in the end, if you're using Storybook, you can use the Storybook MCP server with or without Storybook. As long as the design system is built with Storybook, your consumer can use it without Storybook. But if you're using Storybook, it will also say, okay, now I've built these UI components. Now I'm automatically going to write stories for it because the MCP server told me to write stories for my new UI. And it will get the URLs to the stories to show you at the end of the task, here are the 4 stories I wrote. Here's how you can view them. And so I've been working on this specific topic a lot. Maybe you can hear that from the way I talk about it, but it just feels so magical when you see it. I just did this like an hour ago, and I because I needed to test something out, something completely unrelated, and it replied to me, "Here's the stories that I wrote for you," and they just worked, and like there were play functions and all that jazz, because it's now pulling in this information from the MCP server. And of course, then you can host this MCP server on Chromatic so that when you publish your Storybook online for a design system to be used, anyone can also just connect to that MCP server. In the future, we are hoping to add testing capabilities also. We have some proof of concepts so that not only does it write your stories for you, as it does today, but it also knows that it should run the test for those stories via the Storybook MCP, which is way faster because it's a runtime that's already running. It doesn't have to spin up CLI. Storybook is just running. And then Storybook will reply with, yeah, those 2 stories, they're now failing because you changed the color to blue or whatever. And then it will iterate, like the agent will know to iterate and then keep improving the stories or the UI and then come back. And we're not quite there yet with that testing story, but that's what we're seeing today. So really just taking the 3 pillars of Storybook, which are like development, documentation, and testing, and seeing like how does that work in a coding agent environment. And what we realize is that, well, we need to make the same available, like the same content available with the MCP server.
Cool. That's exciting. I'm like so interested in how MCPs are developing and like what the shape of that looks like. It seems like there's obviously, there's still rough around the edges and a lot of stuff to to mature there, but it's pretty fascinating to see. To shift the conversation one more time, I think it would be it'd be good for us to just talk about the sort of funding force behind Storybook, the open source project. So the company that you are employed by is Chromatic, and Chromatic sort of started as a hosted Storybook platform that ran snapshot visual tests. It's been several years since I've actively used Chromatic since I've been at a company that's used it. So I'm curious about like how the product and the company has evolved, and what new features you are working on, and what are you thinking about?
Yeah. So I think the cool thing about Chromatic is that it has grown with Storybook, and we always say that Chromatic is built by the team that built Storybook, and that is true. It's not just because Chromatic hired 5 people and then they just sit over here on the side. Like, we're actually the same team building the same things. So the integration with Storybook has gone way deeper for Chromatic over the past few years. We have the visual testing add-on now, so you don't necessarily have to go to chromatic.com to see your visual tests. You can see them in the add-on panel inside the Storybook if you want to, and also run them. A big push that we've done at Chromatic over the past year has been accessibility regression testing. So essentially similar to, you have your visual baseline. You take a snapshot of all your stories and like, this is the screenshot. You do the same thing for all your accessibility violations, because you don't start from 0 violations. No one does that, unfortunately. You maybe have thousands of violations, and then Chromatic says, okay, this is your baseline of violations. This story has exactly these accessibility violations because like the contrast is bad. And so then when you make changes, Chromatic will tell you, oh, you have a new violation. That's bad. Your CI is getting blocked on this because you don't want to merge in this new violation. Then you're getting that count at least to stay like stable, and hopefully also decrease it over time. That's at least what we're seeing from some very interesting teams that are using this accessibility testing. Chromatic is essentially, because there's this chart that anyone can see of the violations, and we just see it's a burn down chart that's going down and down, and that's very magical for me to see, like, that we're actually making an impact on improving the accessibility of the web today. And then Chromatic has also expanded like to support multiple browsers. There's also we did a recent webinar on a feature called Steady Snap, which is essentially, we're not just taking a screenshot of the story, we're taking multiple screenshots to figure out if it's a flake or not, or if it's, because if you take a screenshot of like text in a browser, the anti-aliasing will like change it from slightly gray to very much gray, and that's just so annoying on a pixel level. You don't want to deal with that, and that's what most people run into when they do like. There's a lot of people that build their own visual regression testing setup. Like, you can do to match snapshot in Playwright or wherever you want, right? But then they run into the flakiness, and this is unstable, and now the date changed from being December to November, so now there's a new snapshot because of that, right? And all those things is what we're trying to solve in Chromatic directly, so you don't have to deal with that. And that's really the value add over just building up your own testing suite, essentially. We're also doing Turbo Snap. It's been there for a few years, but that's essentially whenever Chromatic decides to take snapshots of your storybook, it looks at what are the Git changes compared to the module graph, and then say, we're not going to take snapshots of all your stories because that would be too expensive for you. We can see that your Git changes only have changes to these 5 stories because you only changed the button component. So we're only going to snapshot those, and we're only going to bill you for those 5 snapshots. So that's it's really just about optimizing also the speed, of course, to make it way faster. And that's what people, they enjoy, I think. And then, of course, building something on top of the Storybook MCP server. There are different value adds when you can have that hosted for you at the click of a button. And we're very excited to see where we're going to take this. We don't quite know yet, but I'm sure you'll see at some point.
Yeah, those 2 things, Steady Snap and Turbo Snap, like I as you said, you can build out your own testing snapshot infrastructure and you will run into these things. And having a thing that like just does that for you and you not having to worry about that and build it yourself, pretty cool. I also love that you can do selective testing, because that was like at my last company, Descript, that was a huge problem. We had thousands of tests thousands of screenshots and running them all was very cost inefficient and very slow. Yeah, pretty excited for you guys. That MCP thing seems super cool. Just one thing before we move on to our last question. If I want to use Chromatic, but I don't use Storybook, can I?
Yes, you can. Chromatic has an end-to-end integration. We always propose that you use it with Storybook because you have more lower level components, so your screenshots are more stable. But you can integrate it into Cypress and Playwright. So there's a Chromatic slash E2E Playwright package, I believe it's called. And that allows you to, at the end of any Playwright function, or in the middle of any Playwright function, call take snapshot. Or you can also make it the default, so all your Playwright tests, they just do that automatically at the end. And that will generate these snapshots, put it into Chromatic, and then you get the exact same experience as if it was Storybook. The little known detail is that, in fact, those snapshots generate storybooks. And it doesn't just take a screenshot, it takes a snapshot of the DOM as well, so you can inspect it. And it's not interactive because you can't take a snapshot of JavaScript memory, but it's like it has HTML and all that stuff, and it looks exactly as it's supposed to do. Which again, for me, is a way more powerful than just having Playwright traces, because they're like these videos and recordings, whereas for Chromatic, the E2E snapshots are actually the DOM that you can inspect in your browser. So yeah, we do support Playwright in Cypress.
Sweet. So looking to the future, we've already done a little bit of it, but what's next for Storybook? And at a larger, more generic scale, what do you think's next for UI development?
So what's next for Storybook right now is definitely trying to make it easier to get to those first 5 or 10 stories. Getting over that initial hurdle of setting up your Storybook. Maybe doing automatic integrations to the biggest styling providers like Tailwind, so you don't have to set that up. Or maybe we will be running some stories for you in the background and see how they fail, and then fix those failures before you even have your Storybook set up. But definitely that is the biggest issue we see today, is people sometimes choke on even just setting up the first story, and then they don't get any further. We're also experimenting with, right now we call them ghost stories, but essentially, what if we generate stories for all your components in the sidebar, but they didn't exist on the file system, they were just there, so you could look at them, oh, this is a story for this component that I haven't even written yet, but I can see it being written, and I can click save to file, and then it's on the file. So both getting to those first 5 stories, but also going from 100 stories to 5,000 stories to just to get coverage for all the components. I think that's where we want to help people and really improve the experience, to just make it easier to get your Storybook running. UI development in general, I think, well, of course, AI is going to be part of that somehow. What we're seeing right now is that everyone is building the same websites because AI loves purple. And so we're building purple websites. I think we're going to see a shift away from that, both by the model builders like Gemini's and stuff. They're going to figure out how to do that less generic. But also there's going to be tools that show up that enables you to be more personal with how you build your UI. We have, I personally, I love Svelte. I would love to see Svelte just grow like a ton, because I think it's just a way better authoring experience. But I don't think that we're going to see major shifts in frameworks usage over the next few years, because people that just tend to use what they know, which is fair. I also do that. I don't think I have any hot takes on UI development. I think we're going to stay with our components, and as I said, like documenting these components and having great a great structure for components is going to be very important for your AI understanding them. And so I think investing time into that, of course, I'm biased because I'm on the Storybook team, but we see that when you invest time into that, the LLMs just get way better at using the components, so you don't get into these back and forth and say, please use the component correctly. I think that's going to be a big push as well.
Well, sweet. Thanks for coming on. This was a fun talk about Storybook. You guys have been at it for a really long time, and it's constantly improving. So thanks for coming on and talking about it. I'm also really excited to dig into the MCP server stuff.
Mm-hmm. It's we have a sneak peek blog post about the MCP server stuff where you can also sign up for early access.
Cool. Thanks, Jeppe. This is awesome. It's so exciting to watch Storybook develop. It's just been such a cornerstone of the front end development community for such a long time, and I'm glad that y'all have evolved so well and adapted so well because of how much everything has changed since it started. Like the industry feels very different than what it did, and it's awesome to have that one stable tool that we can rely on. So good work.
Cool. Thanks.